There was a dish in Russia so good that a nobleman didn't ask for the recipe. He bought the cook, and the cook's wife, and their children. A whole family, purchased outright, so one wealthy man could taste this thing again whenever the mood took him. That was legal then. That was normal. And the dish that changed hands along with those people wasn't gold leaf and truffles. It was made of milk skin and cream of wheat. Sit with that for a second. Milk skin. The film that forms on top of warm milk. The thing most of us scrape off and flick into the sink without a second thought. In the right hands, that was worth a family. And then, inside of about 100 years, the whole thing was gone. Not banned, not lost in a fire, just gone. The way a language goes when the last people who spoke it at home stop speaking it. I want to tell you how something that valuable disappears so completely, because the reason has almost nothing to do with what you're probably picturing right now. The dish is called Guryev's kasha. And if you grew up anywhere near a grandmother from the old country, that second word might already be doing something to you. Kasha. In a lot of American homes, that word never left. Kasha varnishkes on the good plates. A pot of it on the back of the stove on a Sunday. Bowtie noodles, that dark, nutty, toasted smell filling a Brooklyn apartment or a house outside Cleveland. Millions of families carried that word across an ocean without ever stopping to ask where it came from or what it used to mean. Here's what it used to mean. Back home, kasha wasn't one thing. It was a whole category, the way casserole is for us. Any grain cooked soft was a kasha. Buckwheat, yes, but also millet, barley, oats. It was the floor of the whole cuisine, the thing that filled the stomach when there was nothing else, the food of the poor and the food of the army and the food of the nursery. Which is exactly what makes this story so strange, because Guryev's kasha is the one that went the other direction. It took the humblest word on the table and turned it into the most expensive thing in the room. So let me tell you what was actually in that bowl, because when you hear kasha, you're picturing a plain gray porridge, and you should throw that picture out. Start with semolina, cream of wheat. Same stuff that's in the red and white box in your pantry right now, the breakfast cereal. That's the base. So far, nothing fancy. Now the part that breaks people. You take cream, real cream, and you warm it slow in a shallow pan, close to the heat but never boiling. And you wait. A skin forms across the top, thin as paper, pale gold. You slide a knife under it, lift it off in one whole sheet, and set it aside. Then you wait again. Another skin forms. You lift that one too. And again, and again. 30 times, sometimes 40, until you've got a stack of these delicate golden sheets, each one the reward for standing over a low fire and doing nothing but paying attention. Those are the penki, the skins, and they are the entire point. Because now you build a layer of the semolina, cooked soft in milk and sweetened. Then a layer of those cream skins laid across it like sheets of pastry. Then chopped nuts, hazelnuts, walnuts, almonds. Then dried fruit or a spoon of jam. Then more semolina, more skins. You stack it up like a little cathedral. You scatter the top with more nuts and fruit, and you slide the whole thing into the oven until the surface takes on color and the edges pull away from the dish. When you cut into it, you can see every layer. It's warm. It smells of toasted nuts and caramelized cream and something almost like vanilla, even when there's no vanilla in it. It is soft and rich, and it took you the better part of an afternoon. That's Guryev's kasha. Now let's talk about how it got its name, because this is where it stops being a recipe and starts being a story about people. Count Dmitry Guryev was the finance minister of the Russian Empire in the early 1800s under Tsar Alexander I. Rich man, powerful man, the kind of man who had a dish named after him and let everyone assume he'd invented it. The story that gets told most often goes like this. Guryev is a guest at the home of a retired army officer. Dinner ends, dessert comes out, and it's this layered kasha. Guryev takes one bite and, the story says, he's so overcome that he gets up from the table and goes into the kitchen to find out who made it. It wasn't the host. It was the host's cook, a serf named Zakhar Kuzmin. And Guryev did what a man of his position could legally do. He arranged to buy Kuzmin, not employ him, not hire him away with a better wage, buy him, along with his family, as property, so the recipe would live in Guryev's house from then on. In that time and place, a person could be owned. Most of the people cooking and serving and carrying wood for the fires in stories like this one were owned. This is one small, strange window into what that actually meant day to day. A man's talent could be that good, and it still wasn't his. His name went on nothing. The Count's name went on everything. I'll be honest with you here, because the sources don't fully agree, and I'd rather tell you that than pretend. Some accounts say Kuzmin invented the dish outright. Some say Guryev had a hand in it. Some say the whole tidy anecdote got polished up years later, the way these stories do. What almost everyone agrees on is the shape of it. A brilliant cook who was somebody's property, a powerful man whose name survived, and a dish that carried the wrong person's name for 200 years. So when you see it written on an old menu, Guryev's kasha, remember there's a second name that never made it onto the card. That's usually how it worked. Once it was in the Count's kitchen, the dish climbed. Fast. By the middle of the 1800s, Guryev's kasha had moved off private estates and into the best restaurants in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It became the thing you served at the end of a long, serious dinner, the flourish that told your guests exactly what kind of house they were in. It made it, eventually, to the table of the imperial family itself. And here's the part I keep coming back to. What made it a luxury wasn't a rare ingredient. There's no saffron in it. No imported spice you had to send a ship for. Cream, semolina, nuts, dried fruit. A prosperous farmer had all of that. What he didn't have was the one thing the dish really required. Time. Somebody else's time. To make Guryev's kasha, you needed a person who could stand at the stove for hours, doing nothing but lifting skins of cream, one at a time, while the rest of the house ran itself. That's not an ingredient you can buy at market. That's a servant. That's a kitchen full of them. That's a whole structure underneath you, holding you up, freeing your hands. So the richness in that bowl was never really about the cream. It was about the fact that your afternoon belonged to you, and someone else's afternoon belonged to you too. You were tasting free time, other people's free time, stacked 40 layers deep. That's what a nobleman was actually paying for when he bought Zakhar Kuzmin. Not a recipe. A guarantee that the hours would always be there. Hold on to that, because it's the whole reason the dish dies. And it dies for a reason nobody expects. And it's not the reason you're thinking. Everybody assumes they know what happened to fancy food in Russia. Big year, red flags, the whole world turns over. We'll get there. But that's not what actually killed this dish. And the real answer is quieter and, honestly, sadder. Let me set the scene first. Picture one of those great kitchens around 1916. Copper pans on the wall. 3, 4, 5 people working in it. A fire that never fully goes out. Somebody whose entire job that afternoon is cream and a knife and patience. Now move forward just a few years. The estates are empty. The families who own them are gone, scattered, some abroad, some worse. The cooks and the kitchen staff have walked out the door into a completely different country, one where nobody owns anybody anymore, and nobody has a staff of 5, and nobody, anywhere, has an idle afternoon to spend lifting skins off cream. I want to be precise here because it matters. Nobody passed a law against Guryev's kasha. There was no list of forbidden desserts. The recipe survived. You can still find it printed. The problem was never the recipe. The problem was that the dish needed a world to exist in, and that world ended. The servants, the private kitchens, the long dinners, the whole arrangement where one person's hours could be spent entirely on another person's dessert. All of it, gone inside a decade. And once the structure underneath the dish was pulled out, the dish just came down, not with a bang, with a shrug. There was simply no one left with an afternoon to give it. A recipe is easy to save. You write it on a card. What you can't write on a card is 4 hours of somebody's undivided attention. That part doesn't transfer. And when that part disappeared, so did the dish, quietly, without anyone deciding to let it go. If that feels far away, it shouldn't.
because the same thing was happening in American kitchens, and the timing lines up closer than you'd guess. Think about the desserts your own grandmother made from scratch. The ones that took a whole Sunday. The layered icebox cakes built up over hours in the refrigerator. The baked custards you had to watch. The trifles from the back pages of the ladies' magazines, assembled in stages, one careful layer at a time. Now think about when they vanished. Through the 1950s and into the 60s, two things happened at once in America. Women went to work in numbers they never had before, and the boxes arrived. Instant pudding on the shelf, cake mix, a freezer in every kitchen, and a dessert you could pull out of it.
The afternoon that used to go into a scratch dessert wasn't there anymore, because the person who used to spend it had somewhere else to be. Same story, different kitchen. A rich, slow, made-by-hand dessert dies out, not because anyone hated it, but because the free time that fed it dried up. In one country, it was serfs and estates coming apart. In the other, it was mothers clocking in and mixes on the shelf. Two completely different histories, and underneath them, the exact same cause. The food didn't fail. The hours ran out. Now here's where I thought the story ended. A grand old dish buried with the world that made it. Sad, clean, over. It's not over. Because the base of Guryev's kasha, that plain semolina, didn't disappear at all. It went the opposite direction. And what happened to it next is the strangest turn in the whole thing. That semolina has a Russian name, manka. And if you ask almost anyone who grew up in the Soviet Union what manka means to them, you will not hear the word luxury. You'll watch them make a face. Because manka became the porridge of childhood. The grey bowl at the cold end of a long table in a school cafeteria. The breakfast you had to finish before you were allowed to leave. Cooked too fast, too often, by someone feeding 100 kids at once, it came out with lumps. And for a whole generation, that's what manka is. Not a treat. A duty. A lukewarm bowl with a skin on top that you weren't allowed to leave behind. The dish was so common, so ordinary, so tied to that plain childhood bowl that it landed in the great Soviet cookbook, the one that sat in nearly every kitchen, the closest thing the country had to a shared Bible of how to eat. Millions of copies. And in it, right there in print, is the recipe for Guryev's kasha, the Count's dessert, sitting a few pages away from instructions for the plainest porridge imaginable. Same grain, 2 lives. At the top, a layered dessert a man once bought a family to keep. At the bottom, a cold, lumpy bowl a child is trying to choke down before recess. One ingredient, holding both ends of a century. I don't know a cleaner picture of what happened to that whole world than those 2 bowls. The dessert of the few becoming the duty of the many, and the grain not caring either way. So let me come back to where we started. A man who bought a cook, a dessert worth a whole family, and a thing that vanished inside 100 years without ever being banned. Here's what I couldn't get over once I understood it. We tell ourselves that food disappears because of big forces, wars, governments, shortages, and sometimes it does. But this dish didn't die from any of that. It died from something much smaller and much harder to fight. It died because we ran out of the kind of time it was made of. Think about what Guryev actually bought that day. Not a recipe. He could have had that copied out in 5 minutes. What he bought was a promise that somewhere in his house, forever, there would be a person with nothing better to do than stand over a pan of cream and lift and wait and lift again. He was buying guaranteed patience. He was buying the certainty of unhurried hands. And that is the one thing none of us can buy anymore. Not the Count, not you, not me. The recipe survived every upheaval you can name. What didn't survive was the afternoon. The willingness and the ability to give hours to something that only pays you back in how it tastes. That's why it's gone. Not because someone forbade it, because nobody has the time it's made of, and we mostly stopped believing that kind of time was ours to spend. You can still make it, by the way. The recipe's out there. Cream, semolina, nuts, fruit, and a stretch of a quiet afternoon you're willing to lose. And if you ever do stand over that pan and lift off that first thin skin of gold, you'll be doing the exact same motion a serf named Zakhar Kuzmin did 200 years ago, in a kitchen that isn't there anymore, for a name that wasn't even his. I think most families have a dish like this somewhere. Not this one. Yours. Something that took all afternoon. Something one specific person made, and made well, and took with them when they went. And now, nobody in the family makes anymore because nobody has the hours, or nobody ever wrote it down. If there was a dish like that in your family, do me a favor and tell me what it was called down in the comments. Even if you're not sure how it was spelled. Especially then. That's usually how these things get remembered at all. One person saying the name out loud before it's the last time anyone does. And if you want another one of these, I went looking for a Russian dish that was supposed to be humble and found out the rich were quietly eating it too. That one's next. I'll see you there.